Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick.
And I'm Karl.
Today we're going to talk about Dr. Jonathan Swift's modest proposal of 1729. But before we do that, I wanted to plug Uncle Brett of School Sucks podcast. He engineers and makes this thing sound good. He's the third creative piece of this. Because if he doesn't touch this podcast, it's just the ravings of two madmen. And School Sucks has been such a good friend to Online Great Books and our show. I wanted to let everybody know that he has a program coming up that he calls the University. That's going to be March 7th, 14th, and 21st. sspuniversity.com/ideas into action, and sign up to go hear a whole bunch of people help you develop better research skills and persuasion skills. I'm one of the presenters where I talk about how to read a book and how to make notes. He's got Tom Woods on there. Tom Woods is a big libertarian thinker. I think he was a Yale economics professor. Tom Woods is going to be on there. Jay Dyer of Satirical Hollywood, all talking about persuasion and how to research and how to organize your ideas and become a more convincing person.
Yeah, I'm a fan. He's one of my podcasts I listen to. Interested in everything. You're going to get all sides of the thing. He's definitely got his positions, but you're going to get all sides of it. And I really enjoyed the most recent one, I believe, with Dave Smith, where you get the thumbnail sketch of the history of American education, which if you are interested in that sort of thing, that's a good jumping off podcast. You just wind up Brett and say, go on that subject, and then he goes. It's worth listening to.
Through doing all this weird pod stuff, gotten in touch with him. You know, I listened to that show for a long time, and he influenced me to help influence me to pull my kids out of school and homeschool the kids, and really Online Great Books and everything too. And he's come to be a friend. I really appreciate knowing Brett Veinotte. Anyway, go check him out. Go check out his University, where he's working really hard to help people, do like continuing adult education, help people be better people. Go check that out. And of course, always go support us by going to onlinegreatbooks.com/OGB podcast. And you can join our little VIP waiting list. And when you do that, we'll send you all kinds of things that will help you read the great books. And if you want to, we can also send you our newsletter that comes out every month. And I think it's pretty good too. But Swift made a modest proposal in 1729.
Yeah, I'm chuckling. It's funny. It's short enough we could almost just read the thing.
Yeah, I thought about it.
And no commentary, just read it. It's an angry little book. Maybe we should just read the first paragraph, and then we can talk about what the proposal is.
Yes, a modest proposal. The full title: A modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burden on their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public. Publick. I like that.
Oh, I have the Amazon version. I'm sorry. And Jeff Bezos regulated the spelling.
Burden is Burthen, of course, written in 1729. Yeah, read that first paragraph.
It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags, and importuning every passenger for an alms. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants, who, as they grow up, either turn thieves for want of work, or leave their dear native country to fight for the Pretender in Spain, or sell themselves to the Barbados.
The Pretender in Spain. Who was that?
Oh, I can't keep track of it all, but there was probably the Catholic King of England. Which I think there still is if you look on the internet.
A Catholic King of England?
Yeah, you can. I think he's like 80 years old. He's a German guy. Yeah, if you just disregard 500 years of dynasties, right, you can find a Catholic King of England.
Yeah, because they had that Civil War thing where they decided they didn't want any Catholic kings anymore. You know, one of my favorite things to talk to people about who aren't as geeky as me is that the House of Windsor is really the Saxe-Coburgs, and they're a bunch of Germans that they imported because they ran into a genetic dead end and needed some more royalty. It's fascinating.
Yep, Germany ascendant.
Yeah.
It's through their children, which it fits in with a modest proposal, right? How are you best going to use your children for economic gain?
I got my fingers crossed for a Habsburg resurgence.
Who are the last living Habsburgs?
Well, I follow Edward. I think it's Eduard Habsburg on Twitter.
He's got Twitter.
Uh-huh. You know, there's some Rothschilds on there. I shitpost the Rothschilds all the time. I love Edward Habsburg. I think he's the Hungarian diplomat to the Vatican.
That would make sense.
And he's way more Catholic than the Pope. Way more Catholic than the Pope.
Yeah. Nobody goes to Twitter anymore. It's too crowded.
Right. The Habsburgs are there. It's over. Maybe that's where they restore their dynasty. Maybe that becomes their territory.
The king of Twitter?
Yes.
Interesting. I might get behind that. Anyway, should we get back to the text we're talking about?
Sure.
So he's setting the scene. Swift was an Anglican Episcopalian, I guess, because he was in Ireland. Church of Ireland, which is an Episcopalian church. Clergyman living in Dublin or near Dublin. So the town he's walking through is Dublin. And he's seeing poverty all over the place. What he wants to do is fix this. And so in the second paragraph, he says, whoever could find out a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound, useful members of the Commonwealth would deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation. You know, like Nelson. Well, I have that highlighted, useful members of the Commonwealth.
Some of that utilitarian calculus here.
Yeah, so that's a presumption. Now, this is satire, so it's irony. He's saying things that he does not mean.
Wait a minute.
To say other things that he does mean.
How do you know?
How do I know? You mean you think he's an honest cannibal?
Maybe.
Did we give it away? Spoiler. He proposes cannibalism.
Yeah, he wants to. Yeah, he sets. It's so ridiculous. He sets forth a whole bunch of math. By the way, this thing reads to me, like when I was reading this, I thought, this sounds like almost any other social engineering project that I hear people put forth in earnest today. He says, there are about 200,000 couples in Ireland, and half of them are the wives, right? And around 30,000 of those people can actually pay for their own kids, so we'll not worry about them. And then so many of them are going to have miscarriages. So, that means we've got about 120,000 children every year. If we can just do this, and this, then, the numbers all improve, whatever. I mean, it's just all about the math. It's all about sweeping this problem under the rug so nobody has to, step over these people starving in the street and just kind of make the numbers better.
Right. It's an economic solution to an economic problem, dealing with the numbers. So he gets to his modest proposal. I shall now therefore humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope will not be liable to the least objection. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young, healthy child, well nursed, is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, and I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout.
The Americans.
Yeah, I love that he got the idea for cannibalism from an American visitor.
He didn't get it from Montaigne.
No, it was some frontiersman in Boston. There's so much to talk about here.
Oh, he just goes into such agonizing detail. A medium-sized child, when born, right after being born, will be 12 pounds, and in a solar year, if tolerably nourished, will increaseth to 28 pounds. And then he proposes how much that 28-pound one-year-old weanling would sell for, and then how you might cook them, and what the market for that meat might be.
Oh, there's recipes in here.
There's recipes? Yeah.
I'm going to just assume that you're probably not a Will Ferrell fan.
No, I'm not.
In comedy.
We need to do a show about comedy. Will Ferrell does this thing where he just tries to make everybody that watches him uncomfortable.
Right. He takes the joke and he goes further and further and further and further.
Yeah, that's not valid comedy for me.
Yeah, the joke is not the original joke. The joke is the structure of the joke. That he's going to push it further and further and further. And kind of what Swift is doing. You could have done it in a page and said, well, why don't we just eat the Irish children?
Yeah.
Well, no. Why don't we eat them this way and keep them, for a certain amount of time and raise them in certain ways? And he describes a child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends. When the family dines alone, the fore or hind quarter will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt will be very good boiled on the 4th day, especially in winter. He talks about the advantages to the nation from this practice to get rid of these, poor children.
Oh, he lists a number of advantages. We'll get to those in a second. But he says that the food would be extra good for landlords because they've already devoured most of their parents.
Yes, you caught that.
Yeah. And then he says, but, we're going to have some supply problems because 9 months after Lent, the markets will be glutted because of all the popish infants. And I wrote next to this, Karl, is this true?
In the strict observance, yes.
Yes. So you've got all the popish kids are born 40 weeks after Easter.
That's right.
He is risen indeed. Is that heresy?
No. So Roman Catholics do not follow this as strictly, perhaps, as they used to. But I did once see an article about when Orthodox, especially say they have married priests, when they would be capable of going unto their wives, because they have so many fasting periods, and of course they can't do it the day before liturgy, which is why Orthodox do not have daily liturgy if they have married clergy, because otherwise they're never going to go see their wives.
They're like boxers. They have to save their chi.
But if you're real strict and you follow all the canons, it ends up to be like 3 weeks in the year that they can get. I'm sorry. That's probably also slightly blasphemous.
If that's what it is, that's what it is.
Yeah. So anyway, there is an advantage in this scheme because Ireland is being overrun by papist children. Even in 1725, the Protestants had already started not to breed very much.
Yep.
And the Catholics kept doing it. And so you have the element of demographics. So England is the overlords of the Irish. And they want to make it part of the United Kingdom and actually be Great Britain. Well, if you have a bunch of Catholic Irish babies, can you see this as a problem?
Yep.
Well, we better stop it. How do you stop it? How do you get rid of undesirable people? And I'm just going to whisper something here, dear listener. Potato famine.
Right. That's coming.
Which was awfully convenient.
Okay, we're going to talk about Ireland. Dang it. A few years ago, I took my brood and my spouse to Ireland, and we were in Dublin, went to Trinity Library in Dublin.
Did you go to James Joyce's house?
I did not go to James Joyce's house. I would not darken his door. Saw the Book of Kells, saw that beautiful library there, delicious food, great people. Went to Kilmainham Jail. Have I told you my Kilmainham Jail story?
I'm not sure. Tell it and I'll tell you.
They had their, Easter Rebellion of 21. The rebels who were petitioning to, and eventually, acting out violence to try to separate Ireland from Great Britain, were eventually jailed there and then executed at Kilmainham Jail. And then, then we get the Republic of Ireland, and they get control. The Irish people get control of the jail. It was an English jail. It was built in the late 1700s. It has a panopticon portion of the jail that was designed by Jeremy Bentham. There's a big watchtower in the center of the thing, and the person in the center, the guard in the center, could look into every single prisoner's cell and see everything everywhere. Panopticon. And then the older part of the prison is just absolutely a dungeon. And the Irish, it's now part of their national, I don't know what you call it, their National Museum Trust or whatever. And you get to go to this jail and see where the losers write a little bit of history. They capture the thing like it was. It's just dreary, awful, violent, nasty place. They had an uprising in the 1790s, I believe, and the English sent Cornwallis there to put it down. we had just whipped Cornwallis here at Yorktown in the United States, and the English said, he's the right guy because he learned, because he did not assassinate Washington when he had a chance. He did not assassinate Madison when he had a chance, so on and so on. Well, he knew where he had made a mistake, and he did not make those mistakes this time, and he crushed the rebellion of the late 1700s. And then they started instituting, this part may be wrong, somebody will check me. Go ahead and don't believe anything we say here, go check it all. They instituted a bunch of laws. The English instituted a bunch of laws that prevented the Irish from consuming a lot of their own agricultural products like beef, and pretty much limited their diet to the one big staple, the potato.
We would call that monoculture nowadays.
Then, of course, the potato crop failed, and they died by the tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands is low.
Hundreds of thousands?
I think, for your estimate.
There were probably 3 million people, something like that, in Ireland at that time. And so they're dying of the potato famine while they're shipping other foodstuffs to England.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably why I am 1/4 Irish.
Oh, no. Which part?
You can't...
Your liver?
Liver. You knew that joke was coming, you racist. And I don't know, I actually don't know, their family name was Pelly. I do not know why they came, but they probably, because of the potato famine, seeking work, seeking livelihood, my grandmother ended up in Cairo, Illinois, which is how you pronounce that town at the southern tip of Illinois. It's not Cairo.
Yeah. In the Walden episode, we talk about him referring to all those poor Irish people in the Northeast that were working on the railroads and so on in the 1850s. That was those people had been here for maybe, I don't know, somewhere between 20 to 1 year, after having fled Ireland. So we went over there and we saw that Kilmainham jail, and it was such a dark, nasty thing, and they left it just as it was, I mean, it was a bummer, bro. I mean, we left, we were all sad, and then 2 or 3 days later, we were in London, and we went to the Tower of London, and it was Disneyfied. You could literally buy a stuffed animal, like an Anne Boleyn plush doll that you could take her head off in the gift store.
Little Lego skeletons of the kids that Richard III supposedly killed.
But it was just an empty box because you couldn't find them. But the Tower, while there's a lot of wonderful stuff that is taking place there, has been a lot of horrible stuff taking place there. And it was all just completely sanitized, unlike Kilmainham jail. Fascinating to me. To see those two things within a couple of days of each other, pretty neat.
Right. So this modest proposal, this is a bit earlier, it's 100 years earlier than the potato famine, but all of these modest proposals to reduce the number of Irish children. So if you're going to do satire well, I think it's got to be true. It's like you're taking your opponent's principles and extending them. You already believe this. I'm just pushing it further. You already believe that the papist children in Ireland are a nuisance and likely to go over to the Pretender, and we ought to reduce them. So why not raise them to the age of 1 year and eat them? You already don't care if they live, right? There are already numbers on a page to be reduced. Can I read a paragraph just because it's funny and sad? Infants' flesh will be in season throughout the year, but more plentifully in March and a little before and after, for we are told by a grave author, an eminent French physician, I love his authorities that he pulls out, that fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than any other season. Therefore, reckoning a year after Lent, the markets will be more glutted than usual, because the number of popish infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom. And therefore, it will have one other collateral advantage by lessening the number of papists among us.
Yep.
Right? That's what they want to have happen. Well, here's a way to make it happen.
Yeah, and there's so many good things about it. If you're really thrifty, you can flay the carcass, the skin of which, artificially dressed, will make admirable gloves for ladies and summer boots for fine gentlemen.
Would those be kid gloves?
Pasquarello will love that. It's gruesome, though. He says, I'd rather recommend buying the children alive and dressing them hot from the knife as we do roasting pigs.
It'd be like lobsters.
Right.
You buy the lobster that's crawling around the tank and take it home and throw it in the pot. You get the little kid, little 1-year-old.
He says later that, well, we're not going to worry about doing this with older people, though, because They are every day dying and rotting by cold and famine and filth and vermin. German. There's a little slip. Let me do that again. And are every day dying and rotting by cold and famine and filth and vermin as fast as can be reasonably expected. But the old folks are dying just right away anyway. Quick enough.
It's an angry book, right?
Yeah.
Some people say, well, why not replace venison with the teenagers? As to the males, my American acquaintance assured me from frequent experience that their flesh was generally tough and lean, like that of our schoolboys by continual exercise, and their taste disagreeable. And to fatten them would not answer the charge. So, you wouldn't want to eat the boys. You probably don't want to eat the girls either because you would lose the breeders, which would make more babies for you to eat.
Yeah.
And he says, and I love this line, he says, and besides, it is not improbable that some scrupulous people might be apt to censure such a practice, although indeed very unjustly, as a little bordering upon cruelty.
Eating them before they walk, that's fine. But after they can walk and have a name.
We wouldn't want to be cruel.
Yeah, he has a lot of advantages here. One, first, it would lessen the number of papists.
Mm-hmm.
Two, poorer tenants could sell these kids and would help them pay the landlord's rent. Their corn and cattle already being seized, and money a thing unknown. Because it's really important.
Yeah, we've already impoverished them.
But the most important thing here is that the landlord gets his money.
Right. The nation's stock, thirdly, the nation's stock will be thereby increased 50,000 pounds per annum. I guess that's GNP.
Right. Very important.
And the goods being entirely of our own growth and manufacture. So this is domestic industry. We're not going to eat French children. We're going to eat Irish children. It's our own stuff.
Who do you think would be tastier? The French children or the Irish children?
The French diet would probably be more fatty, closer to the Mediterranean diet. I don't know. The problem is eating carnivores in general. Humans are omnivores. Yeah. So if you wanted to raise them for food, would you feed them? What would you feed them?
These poor Irish papist children probably aren't getting a lot of meat.
Okay, so they're milk fed. So they're like veal. Okay. Then it might not matter, but I think I'd probably want them to be closer to grass fed.
Okay. Fair enough. Build a papist tractor, and you can just put those kids in there, and they can just pick at the bugs and things, and then you just push it to a new spot for them to graze.
Oh, gosh.
Fourthly, by selling your kids, you won't have to maintain them after the first year. I mean, think of the savings.
Mm-hmm. Fifthly, it's good for the taverns, who could become connoisseurs of the best way to produce these children. I like the sixthly, though. That one made me chuckle. It's a great inducement to marriage. It's going to increase the care and tenderness of mothers toward their children because you can get money out of them.
And their old man will be less likely to beat them up because they're carrying the cash crop when they're pregnant.
Right. He says men would become as fond of their wives during the time of their pregnancy as they are now of their mares in foal, their cows and calf, their sows when they're ready to farrow, nor offer to beat or kick them, as is too frequent a practice for fear of a miscarriage. I have a daughter who used to ride horses for a little while, and I would just go sit in the barn and listen to people talk because I do that a lot. The woman in charge of the farm where they go and ride the horses, they were talking about a law forbidding the slaughter of horses. Mm-hmm. A horse that is no longer useful would be slaughtered and used for, I don't know, dog food or something, glue, used for something. The carcass would be made use of. And this woman whose whole life is running horses around in circles with kids on their back, surprisingly to me, said that she was not in favor of laws banning the slaughter. Because it means that when that horse can't pull its weight anymore, you don't take care of it at all.
Right. There's
no use for it. You might as well starve it in the stall because you can't get any money out of it. And if you can't get any money out of it, you don't take care of it. So out of her concern for horses, she thought they ought to be allowed to be slaughtered.
Yeah, you have to hire somebody to come out with a backhoe to bury one of them if you can't take it to the rendering plant, you know.
Well, so here's the question. Dear listener, are horses children? Is there anything different between horses and children?
Children don't hurt as much when they kick.
That's right. They probably taste better. But if there's no essential difference between the horse and the child, if it's a difference in size and degree but not kind, then why not treat the children like you would treat humanely the horse? And so if you have a bunch that are no good, or that, aren't likely to have a high quality of life. Like dairy cows. How many dairy bulls are there? How many do you need on your farm?
Was it 1 in 20 maybe?
Yeah, so what happens to the dairy bulls?
Well, they have a good life until they don't.
Right, so they're all killed. They used to be made into veal. That's where you got your veal from, was from the dairy bulls. So I am led to understand. But if you can't have veal, then there's no use for them at all, and as soon as it's delivered, you just kill it. If there's no difference in kind between humans and the animals, we might as well treat the humans like the animals. That's the heart of this satire.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything interesting, unique, valuable in an individual human as human? If there ain't, chop them up and have a papist tartare.
Yeah, a grown fat yearling child roasted whole will make a considerable figure at a Lord Mayor's feast or any other public entertainment. Just like sometimes we have the pig roast, when you bring the pig out with the apple in its mouth. You just do that with a kid. And I don't mean a baby goat. I mean a baby.
The payoff. This is a short piece. I when I read this, I thought, gosh, I always like to do 2 hours on this stuff we read. But we're already here towards the end of the thing, and where he gives us what I think is the real payoff. I want to read the whole thing, Karl, and we can pick it apart. He says, I can think of no one objection that will possibly be raised against this proposal, unless it should be urged that the number of people will be thereby much lessened in the kingdom. This I freely own, and was indeed one principal design in offering it to the world. I desire the reader will observe that I calculate my remedy for this one individual kingdom of Ireland, and for no other that ever was, is, or I think ever can be upon the earth. Therefore, let no man talk to me of other expedients, of taxing our absentees at 5 shillings a pound, of using neither clothes nor household furniture, except what is of our own growth and manufacture, of utterly rejecting the materials and instruments that promote foreign luxury, of curing the expensiveness of pride, vanity, idleness, and gaming in our women, of introducing a vein of parsimony, prudence, and temperance, of learning to love our country, wherein we differ even from Laplanders and the inhabitants of Topinabu, of quitting our animosities and factions, etc. These things that he lists as expedients, all seem like pretty good ideas to me.
Right. So why are they impoverished?
Well, who cares? Let's just kill them and eat them so that we don't have to worry about curing the expensiveness of pride, vanity, and idleness among us.
Sometimes I always feel like I'm a little out of my depth, but trying to think of what's the economy of England in 1729? How are they making their money? Are they making it from goods made in England? Or are they having a bunch of freeholders owning their own little farms and creating wealth? Or is it the British Empire, the beginnings of the British Empire of going to India because they have tea, and going to Barbados because they have sugar for the tea, and of trading in slaves so that you can harvest the sugar?
Right.
But keeping the slaves all in America so as not to have slavery on the island, because that would be bad. Whose interests are being served? That Irish part of me is getting a little mad right now, right? Yeah. I don't have an English part of me.
We have a joke here in Oklahoma, Karl, where you ask somebody, I can't do this because I'm pure cracker, right? But I had a good friend. His last name was Ross, and his, I think, 3 greats grandfather was John Ross, chief of the Cherokee during the Trail of Tears time. And so he would go up to a girl and say, do you have any Indian in you? Would you like some?
That's terrible.
Yeah, so you don't have any English in you.
No, and not likely to.
I'm going to read some more of his expedients here. Of quitting our animosities and factions, nor acting any longer like the Jews who were murdering one another at the very moment their city was taken. The infighting. Of being a little cautious not to sell our country or our consciences for nothing. Of teaching landlords to have at least one degree of mercy towards their tenants. Lastly, of putting a spirit of honesty, industry, and skill into our shopkeepers, who, if a resolution can now be taken to buy only our native goods, would immediately unite to cheat and exact upon us in the price, the measure, and the goodness, nor could ever yet be brought to make one fair proposal of just dealing, though often and earnestly invited to it. These are his complaints. Wonderful rhetoric.
Right. But none of that's going to happen, so we should eat them.
Yeah.
You could have made, you've been to Ireland. I haven't. It's fertile, right?
Oh, my gosh, the food. The food was so good, Karl. I couldn't believe it. Nobody said it was going to be good.
How green was it?
Green, verdant.
Yeah, it's verdant. It's right there in the middle of the Gulf Stream. It's a place of potential prosperity. All those pictures of Ireland that look so green, I have been told, I have not been there, that, yeah, it's that green.
Yeah, I couldn't believe the food, which is not the problem that Swift had. We got there late at night, went to bed, got up the next morning and had breakfast, and the eggs were, I just had fried eggs, a little ham steak they brought, butter, some of their bread. Just.
Are you sure it was ham?
I think it was. It sure tasted like it.
Yearling.
But the eggs were delicious. The butter was fantastic. Their war for independence hangs in the air in Dublin, at least. And the shadow of the English hangs over Dublin. It's palpable, or at least it was to me. And I was eating all that good food. I was thinking, this is the land of the potato famine, Here are all these monuments to where Michael Collins was at this certain time, and here's where that machine gun was that mowed down these other guys, on that one day in the 20s. And I thought, well, what was wrong during the potato famine? What was out of whack? What happened? How can the food be good now and not good then? Maybe some nitrogen fertilizer. I don't know. But most of the agricultural conditions that exist now existed then. What was wrong? But this problem that Swift is talking about is 100 years before the potato famine. This is 1729. The English have been looting Ireland for 300 years.
Well, all right, so let's talk about this. I was chatting with my children earlier today, and it was actually something that Brett said on that podcast with Dave Smith, and he said this a few times about conspiracy theories and how they are a little bit self-indulgent. You have to be careful. And so I'm sitting here after a couple hundred years, were the merchants in London evil masterminds deciding that they wanted to, do the things that they did that had the effects that they did? Or was it just perverse incentives? In other words, you do what we do. We have our little bookmark that you get when you become a member. One of the bookmarks you get is Quine's rules for, I forget exactly what it says, but it's basically be nice, presume that the person you're talking to is not an idiot, that they do have a point, and try to understand it. So when you're trying to figure out human action, your first step shouldn't be, this person's evil, this is Voldemort. Even Voldemort had his reasons, right? You want to figure out what the reasons are. And the reasons, well, when you read English literature, do you just blank out on the money?
No.
I don't know what a shilling is. I don't know what a farthing is. I have no idea. So I just kind of blank out. It's like when I'm reading sailing books and they talk about the rigging.
Right.
Hoist the mainsail, and it's like, okay, there's sailing stuff happening now.
I love that the English coins have names. Like ours is a quarter. Well, that's 1/4. Shilling, crown, guinea. I love that.
All right, let me try to do it then. If you could save a shilling on a pound in your materials by enforcing a monoculture on the Irish farmer, you're doing it for efficiency. You're doing it for economic efficiency.
Yeah, you just say, productivity went up a shilling.
Right.
A shilling on the pound. Yeah.
You weren't deciding to impoverish all these Irish families. That wasn't your plan. That's just a side effect.
Yeah, it's perverse incentives for sure.
Yeah, let no man talk to me of other expedients. That's a marvelous little thing. I believe that's called paralepsis, which is where you say what you're not going to say.
Right.
In the speech. I'm not going to say that my opponent is a child molester. Let's let that pass. But, you said it, right? It's out there. I'm not saying, I'm going to ignore that. It's a wonderful technique. You can do it the next time you have to give a speech at a dinner. You can just insult everybody in the room, but preface it by, I'm not going to say.
I like that.
I'm not going to say that Bob drinks a quart of gin before noon.
So that's paralepsis. What do you call it when you say, have you stopped beating your wife? Does that have a Latin name?
It's begging the question.
Right.
That's actually what begging the question means.
Oh, that drives me nuts. Sometimes somebody will say something and a question hangs in the air and becomes obvious from the thing that they said. It brings up a question. That's not begging the question.
Yeah, begging the question is your question presumes the conclusion. Have you stopped beating your wife? Do you say yes? That means you've been beating your wife. Do you say no? That means you're still beating your wife.
Right.
You need to deny the question altogether.
I like it.
It's a good trick. Scott Hambrick, have you always hated the poor?
Yes.
No, I haven't always. I just started recently. It's a trap. Yeah, it's a good trick if you're evil. There's a lot that's funny in here. There's a lot about the husbands valuing their wives like the broodmares. I think that's funny. You get the idea that that the men aren't around a lot. So it's the women who are burdened with the children, and sometimes the men. I want to go back to, in mine, it's like page 8. I do therefore humbly offer it to public consideration that of the 120,000 children already computed, 20,000 may be reserved for a breed, whereof only 1/4 part to be males. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. If there's no qualitative difference between the human and the animal, okay, that's the if. That is kind of in the air, isn't it? If you and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, to quote the song, then good animal husbandry limits the amount of males. Because what's the matter with males? They're aggressive. They cause trouble. One male can service a number of females.
Yeah, it costs too many resources to maintain.
How many wives did Genghis Khan have?
Not enough, apparently.
You only need one Genghis Khan, right, to make your tribe increase. So it makes sense then to limit the amount of males, to make them be the ones that you eat, to get rid of them, because they're problems.
Is their meat toxic?
Is human meat toxic?
No. Are these men toxic?
They're toxic to the good of the herd. If you want to keep them as a herd, you don't want to have a lot of males around.
Yep.
Hey, here's a thought. If you want to subjugate the Irish, you sure would want to get rid of their masculine people, wouldn't you? Send them to Australia or America.
Yep.
Everybody that has get up and go.
Got up and went.
So the satire is uncomfortable to read, honestly. I laugh reading it, but it's uncomfortable.
It's gruesome. It's really gruesome.
Yeah. It's not too far a leap from what we customarily think to this satire.
And like I said earlier in the show, it reads just like any other social engineering proposal that I hear put forth nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
They state the problem, they give some demographic numbers and some statistics, then they pose their solution, then they couch the solution in terms of economic benefits and how the demographics or the stats will then change, what it'll do to the GNP. There's nothing in any of these about, does it move people better towards a better life, towards a good life? What is the quality of living like? What does it do to the depth of people's relationships? None of that stuff is ever taken into account when people undertake to social engineer.
Yeah, I want to give a quote, and I had to look it up. That's why you heard my typewriter clacking, my typewriter keyboard. There is a science fiction author, Lois McMaster Bujold. I met her briefly in Columbus, Ohio in 1992, I think. Space operas, space marines, you know the drill. This is the kind of stuff I read. She's a good writer, if you like that kind of thing, better than most in that field. And she had one line in one of her books, which was, human beings do not add like numbers. They add like infinities. And I thought that was really good. I've remembered it ever since I read it. That this is the problem with utilitarian calculus at all, is are human lives the sort of things that you should add like numbers?
Yeah.
And I know it makes everything sloppy. So here you are, you're an English politician in 1729. You're wondering how to deal with the Irish. And here comes Jonathan Swift saying, no, you should treat them like humans. And you're like, yes, but Dr. Swift, Look at the numbers.
Yeah, look at the numbers.
How will we feed them? Look at the numbers. Consider the numbers.
Yeah, they are humans. We want to reduce their suffering. So if we humanely put them out at 1-year-old before they suffer further, it's like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Drives me nuts. By the way, Franz Herzog von Bayern would be the Catholic king of England and Scotland if they repealed the 1701 Act of Settlement and ended the prohibition against Catholics taking the throne.
Would he be better than Elizabeth?
Yeah. I don't even know him.
Yeah, if you are a papist, you're not in the succession.
Yeah.
By the way, that's still a law in England. I believe it's still a law.
Yeah, it's the 1701 Act of Settlement made it so.
Yeah, no Catholics allowed. Yeah, so in America, we tend to be Anglophiles. We tend to, care what the royal family does. We share the same language. We watch the same movies. I watch the Sherlock series when I can. But that also means that all of this history is accessible to you as well. And you can see the whole British Empire for the good and for the bad and read about it. This book's, the more we talk about it, my stomach is turning a little bit. It's hard. And then you read it like, well, why not? Okay, right. So here's the problem. So you read this thing, take it seriously, okay? If you're going to read it, take it seriously. Well, why not just eat 1-year-old infants? After all, they're hardly human. They don't really think. They don't have any personality. We have too many of them. So many people think. So many people think there's too many humans. So why not do this? The why not is where you are going to experience probably some philosophical discomfort. And maybe you say, well, all right, how about 1-year-olds? Okay, so there is a famous philosopher, Peter Singer. He's the founder of the modern animal rights movement, pretty much. I've taught one of his books. I like the book because Peter Singer, unlike other people, in my opinion, if his principles lead him to a distasteful conclusion, for the most part, he's not going to shy away from it. He's going to say his distasteful conclusion. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why I taught his book. I think it was Practical Ethics, the book that I taught. But he said, if we're going to be utilitarians, what we're looking at is in the end, it's utilitarianism. How much pleasure, how much value can you get out of a life? Okay? If we're going to measure that, the 1-year-old dog does better than the 1-year-old human. The 1-year-old dog is pretty much a dog, enjoying all the doggy things. The 1-year-old human is still pooping in the crib.
Right.
So he proposed, I don't know what his current proposals are, but he proposed that infanticide be made legal up till 1 year. So the mother could decide whether or not she could raise it, whether the situation was going to be right, whether that 1-year-old had a reasonable expectation of a good life. And if not, we would, of course, humanely dispatch it. Because the only, as Swift says, some scrupulous people might object that it's cruel. And that's the only objection I could see to the program, he says. Well, all right, so why not 1-year-olds? Well, okay, once you go to 1-year-olds, why not 5-year-olds? There's no difference in kind. There's a difference in quality, in degree. So the 5-year-old has a little bit more of a cognitive life than a 1-year-old. So just a little bit more. So maybe we don't do it because the meat doesn't taste good, but, why not, right? Once you start thinking this way, once you start thinking of humans as numbers, and I'm not saying you don't use numbers in government, of course you do, but once you start considering that people are numbers, where do you stop?
Yeah.
I think I made a speech. I'm sorry.
No, it's right. Oh, Karl and his slippery slope arguments.
If you're going to write that, send that to Scott.
Right.
Don't send it to me. Well, slippery slope. Sometimes the slope is slippery.
Sometimes it's slippery.
And if you need to look through history for examples of humans doing horrible things to other humans whom they found inconvenient, you won't have to look real hard. So it's not a slippery slope. It's like a cliff.
It's inevitable. We just talked about the Gulag Archipelago 3-4 shows ago. If you can come up with some rationalization in your mind why it's right to put this group of people in the Gulag, well, the problem actually becomes, where do you stop? Because I don't think there's any question killing some of these kids and selling them for food when you have a food shortage wouldn't work. Starvation would decrease. I mean, he's 100% right. Mm-hmm. It's not just a slippery slope. Like there's no way to determine where to stop. You've already justified it, and you've already showed its efficacy. You just stop when there's just like one great big fat dude left. Maybe, I don't know.
The Leviathan, right?
Right.
This is the second to last paragraph in my edition. I desire the politicians who dislike my overture and may perhaps be so bold as to attempt an answer, that they will first ask the parents of these mortals whether they would not at this day think it a great happiness to have been sold for food at a year old in the manner I prescribe, and thereby have avoided such a perpetual scene of misfortunes as they have since gone through by the oppression of landlords, the impossibility of paying rent without money or trade, the want of common sustenance with neither house nor clothes to cover them from the inclemencies of the weather, and the most inevitable prospect of entailing the like or greater miseries upon their breed forever. So you ask the parents of these kids, would you rather have been sold for money than live like you are now? Nobody cared about the Irish. Come on.
Yep. Not until Van Morrison.
Well, and let's give the best thing. If you're the English, you had a change. I'm going to do a little bit of a divergence on English history. So you had a change in dynasty of the Tudors, and then you had a change in religion, enforced by the Tudors and by the nobles that allied with them. And then you had the Spanish Armada, where the Catholics were coming, and you're worried for the very life of your nation.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this island to the west of you full of Spanish sympathizers. Might as well get rid of them. Ethnic cleansing, I think we call it now. Taking the ethnos that you don't like and getting rid of them.
That's the bad taste in my mouth.
From ethnic cleansing?
Mm-hmm. You talk about, what is it, character and quality, to something. The men versus the women. You're going to keep one out of four, one male for every four women in your brood stock or whatever. Do the men have a different quality?
Oh, then the women? For sure.
Right. So you're trying to determine, are we looking at two different categories of things here, right?
Where are you going with this?
Are the men and the women both equally human? Or are they two different categories of things?
Well, if they're brood stock, they're two different categories of things.
Right.
A bull is not a whatever we call the female cow. Did you know that, by the way? There isn't a word for the singular cattle critter. You have cow and bull and cattle.
Heifer.
But what do you call one of them that's neither?
Oh.
Like we have human for humans.
Right.
We have goose for goose and gander.
Right. You have cattle for a whole bunch, but what do you call one cattle?
Right.
I don't know.
Mind blown. Beef critter.
But you're talking about our men and women, really different categories of thing. But, we would hold that they are humans, both of them, and they should be treated the same way when you talk about ethics or anything else. That whole ethnic cleansing or genocide idea, I think, is a little sneaky too. Like you kill 1 million people, but there are 100,000 from 100 different countries. 100,000 people. But then if they're all from the same country, they'll say, oh, well, that's ethnic cleansing. Like, it's not clear to me that it's worse than, 100 people are dead.
Right.
It's not that it's good. It makes 1 million people dead less because they weren't all identical, right? They didn't share some identity.
Right. Right. Sure. I was just trying to explain what I take to be the motives of the English.
Sure. I know.
To get rid of the troublesome Irish.
But I had to explain why I had the bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I get it.
They have a national security concern.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Just like the United States government thought they had during World War II when they interned the Japanese on the West Coast,
Yep. If people are numbers, you treat them like numbers. If they're cattle, you treat them like cattle. If they are something else, then maybe, I don't know, I'm going to throw this out there. If they are infinities rather than numbers, then maybe the thing to do is as little as possible. Leave them be.
Right.
Let them be who they are. That's what gives a bad taste to me, is people saying, we're going to fix everybody.
Right.
No, leave me alone.
Well, maybe we need some fixing.
I know.
Maybe we need some fixing. And I think he puts forth a number of good fixes here in his chapter, in his paragraph here about the expedients. Let's use neither clothes nor household manufacture except what is of our own growth and manufacture. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with eating our own cooking? Curing the expensiveness of pride, vanity, and idleness. introducing a vein of parsimony, prudence, and temperance. Like what would be wrong with that? I mean, he has a whole list of solutions here in his little backhanded section here. All of them would be superior to any sort of engineering project, with some sort of socioeconomic lever yanking that people typically go to.
Well, buy Irish would have to be enforced, wouldn't it?
Would it?
How would you do it? This is politics from 1729. We can talk about it.
Right.
Be like the Japanese and close the ports?
Well, they have a structure. They had a structure in place to do this that they disrupted, and they were reaping, in my opinion, the rewards of having disrupted the existing structure that helped teach them the expensiveness of pride, that introduced maybe a vein of parsimony and charity, so on. And that's when they disrupted the Catholic Church there and their parish system. They started running into trouble.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm not an expert on this.
Nor am I.
Yeah. So this is Edmund Burke,
right?
Isn't it? Wasn't he Irish as well?
I think he was
an Englishman in Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sort of that you don't disrupt societal structures. At least you don't do it in a hurry.
I think Edmund Burke would say that a societal structure that had emerged over a number of centuries was a very delicate thing that expressed a lot of solutions to a lot of unseen pressures and should be left alone at almost all costs because it was impossible to understand what problems the structure was solving, and that the solution that we posed would almost certainly be worse than anything that had already existed. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, Chesterton said something about that in terms of liturgical reform. If you don't understand something, if you don't understand why it's there, leave it there. You have no right to remove it. You don't know what job it was doing in the structure of the thing.
My dad was in the Army before. Well, he retired from the military, but he was in the Army for, I think, 13 years. Then he transferred to the Air Force. But he was...
You can do that?
Yes, you can do that. Or at least you could in the...
That's like changing class in Dungeons & Dragons.
I know. How cool is that?
Does your experience as a fighter go over to being experienced as a cleric?
Well, he said that he went, I can't remember where he went, but he saw that the Air Force guys didn't have to walk everywhere. And he was in. He decided he needed to make a change. But he was a commo guy, communications guy, radio repairman for a while. He said everybody always wants to do a bunch of knob dicking. That's what he calls it. They see a knob, they got to dick with it. They don't know what it does, but they've got to just wrench on that knob.
Mm-hmm.
No.
I was chatting with a couple of former Navy guys yesterday, but they had the good idea fairy, which is somebody higher up in the command chain who has a good idea and drops it down on you, and now you have to implement it.
Right.
But the good idea fairy never actually considered what's being disrupted, whether it's actually good to the people who are going to have to do it.
Yeah, Chief Hambrick hates knob dickers and hand-wringing do-gooders.
Yeah, so did you like this book?
Yeah, I had read this before. By the way, this is Jonathan Swift. This is Gulliver's Travels Jonathan Swift.
Yes.
You probably know him from that. You said, hey, let's read A Modest Proposal, and I had read it. This is probably the third time I've read it. I read it a long time ago. And when you said that, I thought, oh, Daniel Defoe. In my head, I got it all messed up. Daniel Defoe, the Robinson Crusoe, Journal of a Plague Year. But no, it's Swift, and I think it's just brilliant. It's an amazing rhetorical study. If you can read this and get some distance from it, and just see how he does it, how he builds the case, and it just gets more and more gruesome. And then he throws in these things that are actually reasonable proposals as just like facile expedients, and then slams the door on you at the end when he's like, well, there are a lot of people who are suffering right now that probably wish they were dead. Yeah, it's just a masterful piece of writing.
Yeah.
And then right at the end, he does the same thing that all these hand-wringing do-gooders do. I profess in the sincerity of my heart that I have not the least personal interest in endeavoring to promote this necessary work, having no other motive than the public good of my country, by advancing our trade, providing for infants, relieving the poor, and giving some pleasure to the rich. I have no children by which I could propose to get a single penny, the youngest being 9, and my wife past childbearing. So, I mean, this is what they all do. Like, oh, I'm a humble public servant. By the way, none of this shit I'm saying is going to have anything to do with me. My kids are old enough. My old lady's not having any kids. They're always exempt and have distance from it. I mean, his insight into public politic, his insight into rhetoric, astounding. It's so good. You know, like Dave Barry writes this kind of stuff. Our very own Will Rogers would write that kind of stuff. But nothing is like this. I mean, he is so sharp.
P.J. O'Rourke had a book once on economics called Eat the Rich.
Yeah.
If you can find it, I recommend it. But borrowing from Swift, a modest proposal is a code word for satire.
Yeah, he created a genre in doing this, or perfected it. I got very sad last night, Karl.
Uh-oh.
Paul English died.
So who is Paul English?
Paul English was Willie Nelson's drummer for about 50 years. He wrote the song Me and Paul, about he and Paul's experiences on the road, and Devil in a Sleeping Bag about Paul was Willie's trail partner. And he died, I think he was 87. I don't expect Willie to last much longer. You know, when your best buddy and your swamper goes, it's going to be tough for him to go on. And Willie's kind of the last of them, and is important to me. And it's coming to the end of an era.
Yeah. So if you wanted to tell our dear listeners where to start on Willie Nelson, where should they start?
You have to listen to all of Red-Headed Stranger in order.
Okay. Why do you have to listen to it in order?
It is a gestalt. It is a whole. It tells a story from beginning to end, and you will have heard a number of the songs on that album, but you didn't hear them in the order that Willie put them in there, so that you don't understand what they are until you listen from beginning to end. And the album is revolutionary, I think, and made poor people's music from Texas. Well, maybe didn't make it an art form, but exposed it as the art form that it was to everybody else.
So, for example, you may know Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain and think, oh, that's a sweet song. Okay, go listen to it in the order and understand what's going on the album.
Yeah.
And then listen to it again. Good luck.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. And Paul was all part of that. Maybe not a good guy, but part of it all. They said that you hear about outlaw country music, and Paul English was a real live, genuine outlaw, and it had something to do with the whole flavor of that whole movement. And he's gone now. Terrible. I was lucky enough to see him, I don't know, half dozen times. Glad I did.
Did we mention he was the drummer?
He was the drummer.
Okay.
And when Willie hired him, he really wasn't a drummer. And he figured out how to do it. And he wasn't a good drummer by hardly any measure. But, if you listen to Willie Nelson is one of the best guitar players, I think, underrated guitar players out there. And Willie takes enormous liberties with phrasing and tempo. And Paul enabled a lot of that.
I think I would agree with that. I always like hearing when he gets to do a little bit on the guitar.
The sound of the guitar, one, is completely distinct. And then his phrasing and his harmony when he plays guitar is completely unique. I think that his phrasing, both in his vocals and in his guitar work, were influenced by having Paul behind him for all those years, because Paul was not a metronome. Not a metronome.
Oh, I was instructed on something. This is before the part of the show that I'm nervous about. What are we going to read next? But somebody yelled at me in a seminar, one of the new people, because I said, I thought, although I love Led Zeppelin, I thought that John Bonham didn't keep great time.
John Bonham's not a good drummer.
And then he yelled at me, and he said he kept perfect time. This guy's a musician. I said, all right. And he yelled at me, so I looked it up. The track that most tells me that where I hear the sound being a little squirrely in the drums
when the levee
is
breaks.
when the levee breaks.
Yeah, it's a mess.
But they did it on purpose. No, this is what it says. They recorded it at one speed and slowed it down to change the sound. So this is stuff that happened in the studio, not when he was doing the drumming. So perhaps I was wrong. I'll have to look into this some more. But if I was wrong, I still love Led Zeppelin. I always have.
Yeah, me too.
I had that thought that he was a little squirrely on his timekeeping, and that gentleman yelled at me.
Paul and John Bonham were great at what they did, but Bonham's got no touch. Just everything's a ball bat, and you just hit it as hard as you can. And you try to break the drum head every time, but it worked. He was the best possible John Bonham that he could have been, and he was the right guy for the job. But
so I'm listening to Beethoven in order,
right?
And I'm up to Symphony Number 7 right now, and I've listened to it a few times. I have to do it a few more times, but then I'll move on. So this is a suggestion. Led Zeppelin is a good enough band that you can start at the beginning and go all the way to the end, and every track is pretty good, and many of them are really good. So
especially the ones they stole. No, I don't know.
All right, so I picked this one. What are we going to read next?
You want to read one of these American state papers?
Propose one. I'm flipping through my collection of books here.
The Declaration of Independence. Or how about this? What if you read the Articles of Confederation?
I have never read the Articles of Confederation.
I haven't read it since I was in the 7th grade. Read them since I was in the 7th grade.
Sure. Articles of Confederation. How long is it? Is it like 500 pages or
not long
10?
enough? Apparently, I threw it out. It wasn't powerful enough. No, it's not very long. It's shorter than our Constitution.
Sure, we can do that.
That'll be interesting. We've never done anything like that. There you go. There's another online Great Books podcast. Get a little Robert Paul English and a little Jonathan Swift and a little Articles of Confederation talk. Enrollment probably ain't open right now. But listen, guys, go help us out. Leave a review. Go to onlinegreatbooks.com/OGP podcast. Subscribe. And then also, if you want to work on your research skills and your persuasiveness, check out Brett Veinotte's program there, his virtual summit. You can do that at sspuniversity.com/ideas into action and sign up for his University in here and get, 12 hours or so of a really interesting discussion of researching and rhetoric and persuasiveness from some people that have some pretty big platforms, frankly, and are great communicators. Anything else, Karl?
Nope, I'm good. Did you ever watch the movie Major League?
I have not seen Major League.
Bob Uecker is the play-by-play man, and he's got the color man in the booth with him, and he'll say over to him, "Do you have anything to add?" And the guy just shakes his head.
Well, thank you for listening, and we will talk about the United States' first form of government, the Articles of Confederation, next week. Stay tuned.